الموضوع اللي أنا بدي أحكي عنه مع المشاركين الاثنين ديفيد ماكوفسكي ولورا فريدمان بيتعلق بالتغييرات اللي حصلت في داخل المجتمع الإسرائيلي في السنوات الأخيرة، وليش هالتغييرات من وجهة نظري يعني بتمنع طرح موضوع خيار الدولتين بالوقت الحاضر، وأنه يكون خيار قابل للحياة أقله في الوقت الحاضر. بس رح أحكي بالإنجليزي لأنه مشان الشخصين، لأنه الشخصيتين بدنا نحكي معهم بيفهموني يمكن بطريقة أفضل أحسن ما يكون في مترجم. أعمل شوي تقديم صغير وبعدين أترك الكلام لهم. The rise of the Israeli right became since the year 2000 a major factor on the Israeli political scene and far beyond that. This rise explains why no Israeli prime minister can really work for a two-state solution. When Menachem Begin, the head of the Likud party, became prime minister in 1977, he was surrounded by political figures like Moshe Dayan or Ezra Weizman, able to make compromises. More than that, Dayan and Weizman knew well the region and that a peace agreement with Egypt can mean a drastic change to the balance of powers in the whole Middle East. This explains partly why Begin was himself ready to seal a deal with Anwar al-Sadat, a deal that led to Israel's withdrawal from all Egyptian territories conquered in 1967, including oil and gas fields in the Sinai. This is very important. They withdrew from the whole Sinai. Begin was a rightist among, let's say, centrist member of his government. In contrast, Benjamin Netanyahu, a purely Likud rightist, can be now considered as a moderate compared to those surrounding him. Two ministers like Naftali Bennett, who lives in a settlement built on occupied territories in the West Bank. So many reasons led to the actual situation where the real king of Israel is Yigal Amir. Yigal Amir is the rightist who assassinated Ishaq Rabin in November 1995. Amir or Amir, I don't know how to pronounce his name, is the one who dictates Israel policies toward the Palestinians since 1995. Shimon Peres' failure to succeed Rabin in 1996 was a turning point at all levels in Israel. When Bibi became prime minister for the first time, thanks to Hamas suicide bombers sponsored by Iran and Bashar al-Assad's regime, it was a proof that deep changes are taking place in Israel. The whole mood of the society changed completely. More and more Israelis became anti-peace movement. They simply stopped believing that a two-state solution is by itself a solution or a political choice. The short period between July 1999 and March 2001, when Ehud Barak, the Labour Party leader, was prime minister, offered a last chance to reach a kind of agreement that could have led to a kind of settlement based on the two-state solution. Could have. Unfortunately, Barak was never ready to make the concessions that would lead to such an agreement, while Yasser Arafat was not ready to any kind of compromise without a face-saving formula regarding the city of Jerusalem, supposed to be the capital of the independent Palestinian state. Arafat was ill-prepared for the Camp David summit, where he met Barak and President Clinton during the summer of 2000. The Israeli prime minister was also under tremendous pressure from the Israeli right, was unable to make a move that would force Abu Ammar to accept an offer he couldn't refuse. A lot of changes occurred in Israel during the last 20 years, especially with the migration of thousands of Jews from what was the Soviet Union. This happened by the late 80s and early 90s. These new Israelis contributed in making the country more and more rightist and more isolated from regional developments and the Arab world. Israel by itself became more and more attached to Europe and the US economy and oriented towards the other side of the Mediterranean. Can the Israeli right, with its one-track-minded policies, offer an alternative to the two-state solution? What about the demography? That will pose an existential problem for Israel sooner or later, in 10, 20, or 30 years. The two-state solution is dead for the time being. But how dead is it and for how long? This remains a question. Thank you. Mr. Mاكوفسكي, or who wants to begin?
Okay, sorry, I didn't hear you. The connection isn't clear. I hope you can hear me okay. All right, well, first of all, I want to thank you very much. It's an honor to speak to your distinguished conference. I want to thank Sam Manasseh, too, for all his effort in putting this together. Look, I think I'm not disputing the thesis that Israel has moved to the right, but you have to ask why. And yes, according to the Tel Aviv University Israel Democracy Institute Peace Index poll, March 2017, 56% of Israeli Jews self-identify with the right. However, when you break this down into components, you do see a soft right among this right that could easily join with an Israeli sentiment. And I like to always be constructive and say, what could change these? What could move the map, so to speak? And my belief is that an Arab state outreach could empower those moderates who want to find a two-state solution. And I fear, and I mean this respectfully, of course, that there's been some action of the Arab groups that have empowered Israeli right. Of course, not intentionally, but this has been the consequence. Arabs can influence the Israeli debate if they act wisely. In no small measure, Arab actions have led to Israeli shifts to the right, and they could lead them in the opposite direction. Before I delve into the details, I just want to say that we have to be careful when we define the terms left and right, as they mean different things than they have in the past. Even the most leaders of the most right-wing party in Israel, the Jewish home of Naftali Bennett, as you mentioned him, do not challenge the legitimacy of the Palestinian Authority. This is a revolutionary shift from the Oslo years of the 1990s, when almost the entire right, many on the right certainly, believed that the Palestinian Authority was completely illegitimate. Even today, Likud members of Knesset will say the complete land of Israel movement is irrelevant. So the terms have moved. Has Israel moved to the right? Yes, but the right has moved to the left as well. So the terms are not the same terms that we had in the 90s. Now, I think part of the reason why there's been this domestic shift is because often Israelis do not hear Arab voices condemning Hezbollah and Hamas attacks after Israel pulled out of Lebanon and Gaza. The argument of the Israeli right is that Israel is more vulnerable to attacks after they pulled out. Israel pulled out of Lebanon in 2000, was faced with a war in 2006 when Hezbollah crossed the international border, killed some Israeli soldiers, kidnapped others, and they've been embroiled with the war in Gaza. After they pulled out in 2005, they faced wars 2008 and 9, 2012, 2014, and their takeaway, as we say in America, is withdrawal leads to rockets, therefore not withdraw. It's important not to underestimate the power of this argument. And imagine if these organizations said it's only about occupation, and of course we accept Israel within the 67 lines. If they said we're acting mutual deterrence, we don't want Israel to attack Lebanon or Gaza, it would be one thing. But to say you don't accept Israel anywhere means withdrawal equals vulnerability. Therefore, don't withdraw. People say, well, there's a new Hamas charter today. But even the new charter says, quote, Hamas rejects any alternative to the full and complete liberation of Palestine, the river to the sea. This is the new one. There shall be no recognition of the legitimacy of the Zionist entity, also a direct quote. And I'm sorry to say, but statements by Syed Hassan Nasrallah also make clear they do not accept Israel under 67 or any borders. So, but the good news is that there's polls that say that the majority of Israelis do accept the idea of a two-state solution. Not a large majority, but then the numbers go below 50% when they are asked a follow-up question. Does the other side accept two states? And they'll say no. And then they'll say, will it happen? Never. So the point is we have to think how to get these numbers up so both sides accept two states, both sides accept the legitimacy of the other side. We need dignity for both sides, or else we will not have peace. And of course, if we want peace, we cannot deny the legitimacy of the other side's attachment to religious sides. Ismailis accept that even those who say Temple Mount, they say the Haram al-Sharif is holy to Islam. No Israeli argues this. But they would like to hear Arabs say that the Temple Mount, as they call it, is holy to them too. So we just need mutual respect. I think this would impact how this issue is looked at. Another issue is to try to be explicit about the other side's demand. The Palestinians are very explicit on what they want on land. They want the 1967 lines, perhaps with some land swaps. But when it comes to the refugee issue, the Arab Peace Initiative, which is a step forward, and I know it was assigned in Beirut, speaks just and agreed, but it's vague. 67 is tangible, very tangible. We know what that means. We know the borders of 67. But on refugees, it's vaguer. So we have to be equally explicit about the demands of both sides. The Arab Peace Initiative, while I said it's a step forward, I think to make it more useful, there have to be parallel steps. The Arabs would reject the idea that it would be what we call in America front-loaded, that Arabs do everything first. I think that would not be acceptable to the Arabs, and it's understandable that that would not be acceptable. But it cannot be backloaded either. It cannot say, you get out of the West Bank, you get out of East Jerusalem, and get out of the Golan. Who do they give it to? Bashar al-Assad. And then we'll see, and then we'll take action. There needs to be a step for a step. This way, we need to build confidence of both sides. This is very important. And then I would say Israel, of course, has to take steps as well. If they cannot make it in one leap, it needs to be understanding not to engage in settlement activity beyond the security border. Almost a large majority of the settlers, and Lauren knows this, lived within this barrier. There should be land swap. But there needs to be a direction and make the settlements consistent with two states. But we have to avoid myths. The Israeli public is confident about its future. They have a GDP of over $300 billion. They are listed on the OECD among the world's most advanced economies. On a per capita basis, they have just surpassed Spain and Italy. They have more high-tech companies on the NASDAQ, the New York Stock Exchange, than any country in the world except the US. And on the UN Happiness Index, they're ranked number 11, which is ahead of Britain and the United States. So they're very confident about their future. But they are aware without peace, you cannot live like this forever. But I think there's hope. Also, it's important to say, a lot of people talk about the religious right, but the religious right should not be lumped in one category. They are not all maximalists. Rabbi Ovadia Yosef, who was the chief rabbi of Cairo, and now his son is chief rabbi, gave the halachic, the Jewish law ruling, trade land for peace. Quote, if there's a chance for a permanent peace, then it seems that according to all opinions, it's permitted to return areas of Israel in order to achieve this aim, since nothing is more important than the saving of life. And this is the view of many religious Jews. Look, at the end of the day, there's just too much history and too little geography. But I think that history has fated these people to live next to each other. We have to find a way to bring dignity to both sides. Without dignity to both Israelis and Arabs, Israelis and Palestinians, this will not work. Rejectionism breeds violence, and we need to find a way to peace. I think this should not be considered a fantasy. This should be considered a project. But for this to work, we need interactivity. The Arabs should realize what they say influences whether Israel goes to the right or the left. The Arabs can impact the Israeli debate in a good way. And I think I tried to spell out here some of those ways. It could go on forever, but I don't want to take up too much time. Again, I want to thank the organizers for inviting me. I'm sorry I could not be there in person. I hope on another occasion I will be. But I want to thank you very much for inviting me to address this distinguished group. Thank you very much. Shukran Gazila.
Thank you. Ms. Friedman, please.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I hope it will be...
Excellent. I want to join David in thanking the organizers, and particularly Sam, who pulled this all together. And I also, I'm sorry I can't be there. I have come to, I lived in Beirut, and I've come often, and I look forward to coming again. I hope I have the occasion. You know, we were asked to talk about the tendency toward religious and social extremism and how it impacts resolving the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The starting point for me is to observe, and maybe this is obvious, but I think it's observing, the growing tendency towards extremism, religious and political, or however you want to look at it, is not unique to Israel and Palestine by any means. And when you look at the region and around the world, this is something many countries are grappling with, including many democracies, and there's a lot of tension in this. And in Israel and in Palestine, the factors behind these trends are multiple. And certainly the conflict is one of those factors, and it's an important factor. But, you know, sometimes people say that those of us who are part of the industry of trying to resolve this conflict, that we somehow suggest that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is the only issue that is a problem in these societies, and that resolving it would somehow be a silver bullet. And neither of those are true, and I just want to get that out of the way very directly. There's other issues, demographic, economic, geographic, and historical trends. But I want to make very clear, if you study Israeli or Palestinian society, there is no possible way to understand the changes that have been going on for the past 20, 50 years internally amongst Israelis and Palestinians is not shaped in enormous degree by this conflict. And this is important because it does shape the perceptions of what's possible. And certainly not just possible, but desirable, where both sides have moved over the past 25 years, certainly from a fairly broad support for a negotiated solution to much more extreme positions. But again, the key word here is then perception, because the extremism in both society doesn't deliver any new options. The options here for resolving this conflict are quite limited, and they are, I believe, a negotiated two-state solution or continued conflict until people's perceptions change enough that they want to pursue two states again. There isn't another option. As far as what's happening inside Israel, and that's what I focus on, that's my specialty, not the Palestinian side, I'm going to take a slightly more, less optimistic view than David. I've been arguing, as people keep saying, well, what do you want to say on the 50th anniversary of the 67 war, which is also the 50th anniversary of the occupation? I think we're seeing a moment in time when the post-67 myth on this fiction that Israel can be a liberal democracy, while it simultaneously is ruling over millions of franchised non-citizens, that myth is collapsing under the weight of its own contradictions. And I think it goes very, very deep. When I talk to folks about just Jerusalem, because don't forget this week, Israel is celebrating the unification, the unification of the eternal united capital of Jerusalem. But on the ground, Jerusalem today is more divided and more undemocratic, and in many ways more unstable and insecure than at any time since 1967. That's the reality on the ground after 25 years after 50 years of occupation and 25 years of peace processing. In the West Bank, with all due respect to the broad-based support that David, who I respect very much, that he talked about in Israel, in the West Bank we have 50 years of occupation policies that now the Israeli government really is ceasing to pretend are even temporary. So you have the legal system of the past 50 years, where Israeli citizens, settlers, have the full benefits and rights of Israeli citizens. And we have Palestinians, what is basically military rule, military law, separate and entirely unequal. That's for 50 years. And earlier this year, we saw the Israeli Knesset move to even this pretense of rule of law, Israeli citizens in the West Bank, where they basically said, okay, we agree that you've broken Israeli law and all of this construction, which is illegal even under Israeli law, so we're going to change the law to make it legal. And in terms of where you have different parties that take different official positions on whether or not the Palestinians are legitimate, but you had the Minister of Justice this week in Israel issue a regulation that says that all Israeli laws must apply, state explicitly that they apply in the settlements. And if they aren't going to apply in the settlements, they have to state explicitly why they're not applying in the settlements, which is de facto annexation, which members of the Knesset who are supportive of this said clearly, yes, this is on the road to annexation. We would like it to be more public. That is the reality on the ground of Israeli policy. The collapse of this myth, though, goes beyond the policies in the West Bank or in Jerusalem, which East Jerusalem is still under international law occupied. It extends inside Israel itself, where we have now had successively the most right-wing government in Israel's history under Bibi Netanyahu. And inside Israel, we see governments and the private organizations that are aligned with the right, working hand in hand in what I have called an illiberal trend, an illiberal wave that challenges the core of Israeli democracy itself. We're seeing legislation that undermines freedom of speech. We're seeing legislation directly challenging the ability of NGOs that take progressive positions on settlements, on civil rights, on human rights. We're seeing legislation that seeks to not allow them to operate easily or freely or to fundraise. And by the way, again, this is not unique to Israel. You see many countries around the world pursue these same forms of legislation. But those countries don't tend to be democracies. It's very problematic. We see intimidation efforts, demonization. My colleagues, my friends in the Israeli peace movement, who woke up one day last year to see a campaign online backed by very powerful people, which had their pictures with the gun sites superimposed over their photos and calling them traitors. These are Israeli citizens, most of whom served in the IDF, who take a position that is now seen as increasingly untenable by the right or illegitimate by the right. You see an effort by the Israeli government actively to stop the funding and operations of NGOs that are critical of their policies. In the international arena, pressure on foreign governments to not meet with them, pressure on foreign organizations and governments to not fund them. This is not democratic. This is contrary, by the way, to years of Israeli practice. For most of my lifetime, even the Israeli right very proudly talked about Israel's vibrant civil society and vibrant democracy that supported human rights organizations, that supported organizations that were critical of Israeli policy. Now, at 50 years, as you have reached a moment where there are a strong trend in Israel towards saying, you know what, we'll keep talking about peace in two states, but in parallel, we are going to seek to make these policies permanent. You see a closing of the space for debate, for dissent, for protest, which is very, very troubling. You have death threats against friends of mine in the Peace Now movement. You have courts. In the Israeli system, the courts have always been, I think, again, people have been very proud of Israeli justice for being non-political, the Israeli court system. You now have a very clear effort to challenge the courts and to intimidate the court system into not taking positions that in any way are inconsistent with the policies of permanent Israeli control of the West Bank, East Jerusalem. And basically, no one cares that much about Gaza at this point, except as something to not let it get out of hand. You have military leaders. It goes on and on. Professors, universities. You have theater being shut down because it's seen as too critical, art exhibits, all of this. So all of this context, and here's why it's so important to talk about conflict. In an era when many of my friends in the United States are worried about delegitimization of Israel, none of this is about protecting Israel or Israel's security or Israel's viability as a state. This is not about delegitimization of Israel. All of this illiberalism is about defending Israel's permanent or continued, if not permanent, control over the areas that Israeli politicians have always talked about, but more and more talking about in terms of not occupied territories, because occupation in 50 years has become a dirty word. Not talking about the West Bank and Gaza, they're talking about Judea and Samaria. This is for permanent control. So we see a shift in Israeli society that is about changing this entire debate, reframing it to legitimize, if not permanent control over every inch of the occupied territories, then permanent control certainly of most of it, with very limited options for Palestinians going forward. I also want to add that this trend extends to Israel's operations on the international stage as well, how it operates. And this is again this idea of what it means what is considered a pro-Israel position today. So today, Israel passes legislation which says that if you differentiate, if you distinguish between Israel and settlements, you are taking an anti-Israel and quite possibly an anti-Semitic position. If you call for boycotting either Israel or the settlement, maybe Israel isn't going to let you in the next time you travel. I personally do not support boycotting Israel for a whole range of reasons, but I personally support boycotting settlements. The next time I go to Israel, I don't know if I'm going to be admitted in. We'll see. Under Israeli law, I can be blocked because that is considered now an anti-Israel position. This is where illiberalism takes you. It's a thought crime, essentially. In terms of where Israel plays internationally on this, I will just bring up FIFA, people may know about, where you have an Israeli government gambling Israel's future with the International League of Football, soccer, on the question of whether or not FIFA will normalize and legitimize settlements. It's pretty stunning. This is being treated in Israel as FIFA is taking an anti-Israel position. And if it does not give status to settlement teams as being part of Israel, these are teams that practice and are based in areas that are not part of sovereign Israel, even under Israeli law. But if FIFA does not agree to treat them as part of Israel, that means somehow that FIFA is anti-Israel. It's very worrying. And in the United States, this illiberalism is creeping in as well, with an effort to create an entire raft of legislation that will seeks to penalize and sanction those, not only those who boycott Israel, which, by the way, while I oppose boycotting Israel, boycotts are constitutionally protected free speech under U.S. law as by the Supreme Court, but seeking to sanction and penalize those who boycott settlements. So this illiberalism. On the sort of positive side, and it's both a positive and a negative, we're getting, I think, to a decision point. David talked about what the Arab world can do. And in some ways, I do agree with him. I think the signals that the Arab world sends to Israel and to Palestinians are very important. I am perhaps less optimistic that they are heard. I'm old enough to remember when the Arab Peace Initiative was launched. And I remember feeling like, wow, this is the game changer. Israelis will finally understand that the Arab world is ready to reach out its hand in peace. If only it will resolve the conflict with the Palestinians along the term that's basically recognized by the world, Clinton parameters consistent with Oslo. If we can just end this, we have the possibility of full normalization with the world. And I'm old enough to remember that the reaction in Israel was either ignoring this completely or deriding it as a trap and nitpicking the details that we don't have enough information, there's not enough of a promise, why don't we get advanced normalization, all of that. Well, I'm less optimistic that the signals from the Arab world are going to be definitive in changing Israeli opinion. or have much impact at all. I'd like to believe that they will. At the same time, though, we are reaching a tipping point as the Israeli government, or I think we are, as the Israeli government, whether because it reads the tea leaves accurately and thinks it can get away with a lot more, or because of political reasons, it doesn't see itself as able to rein in the most extreme voices, or if because it's miscalculating, becoming arrogant, whatever the reasons are, we have a moment where Israel, basically the Israeli government, is saying to the world, we expect you now to not only turn a blind eye to our policies, the policy of occupation, which we more or less tried, mostly for 50 years, sort of empty rhetoric saying you don't approve of it, but no consequence. When we're calling your now, we don't want a blind eye. We want the world to give us a green light, embrace these policies, and normalize them, legitimate them. And I think here's the moment we're seeing with European policies on differentiation. I don't know with the U.S. We saw already one quasi-showdown on Jerusalem. I don't think it's definitive where that's going to go. But, this is going to be a clarifying period. Whether or not the world says, you know what, we gave you a lot of wiggle room on this for 50 years. Now, okay, you're right. You win. You get to do whatever you want. International law doesn't apply in Israel-Palestine in this context at all. And we're not worried about the ramifications of that for the world. Or maybe part of a new era in the world where international law just isn't really relevant to anybody anymore. That's one option. The other option is that the world says, no, we've given you a lot of wiggle room because in the past there's been energy towards peace. That energy seems to have evaporated. That is not licensed for you to take more and do more and demand legitimization of things that are legitimate. And now we're going to start drawing more red lines. And I don't know where it's going to end. But I think that pressure is going to be critical. I hope the Arab world continues to reach out its hand with things like the Arab Peace Initiative. And, hopefully we don't have another 50 years, or in 50 years we're not meeting again for a conversation that looks like this, but even under more difficult conditions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Would anyone would like to have any questions? تفضل.
Hi, David. Hi, Lara. What? You want me to step in there? Okay, excuse me. Sorry.
Well,
all right. So,
you have to come here, I believe.
I have to come up there. Oh, boy. Where?
You're okay.
Is this good enough?
No,
More.
Not enough.
Oh, boy.
You have to take my place.
I have to take your place. I'm not going to take your place. All right. Hi, David. Hi, Lara. Hussein here. How are you? Question for both of you. I'll try to make it quick. David, I agreed with almost everything you said, and I understand your case for a step-by-step progression from an Israeli point of view that probably is necessary, and I understand why. On the other hand, from an Arab and especially a Palestinian point of view, it's extremely problematic for multiple reasons, especially because the temporary has a way of feeling very permanent, as you might imagine. So that while Israel might require step-by-step approach, I think to make this work, you'd have to add a kind of Dayton factor, where you go step by step, but everyone agrees on the rough outlines of the final, where you're going. Not the details by any means, but a kind of agreed upon end goal to which you go on a step-by-step basis. But otherwise, really between the power imbalance and the history of step-by-step from an Arab and Palestinian point of view is probably going to make that extremely difficult. Just as going straight to final status would be very difficult from an Israeli point of view for the reasons that you pointed out. So I was wondering if you could address that. And Lara, you talked a lot about, very nicely, about the rise of religious extremism among Jewish Israelis and how that impacts us. And I don't think we need to go into the details of the Islamic factor, especially in this audience. But what about the rise of religious extremism in the United States, and particularly on the Christian right, and the impact that it's having on the American discourse on this subject? Thank you.
Okay, can I go first? Can I?
Go for it, David.
All right, can I respond? First of all, Hussein, good to see you. Always better in person, but glad to see you by Skype as well. I would just say the following on this, and I'm glad you raised it, because obviously the logic would be, in the ideal world, do what you said, which is define the end game first. I do think that would be preferable. Here's the problem, Hussein. And for some in the audience who maybe don't have your knowledge, but the United States, in my view, we internalized the Arab critique of incrementalism of the 90s. And we said, let's go for the end game. And we tried on 3 occasions. People need to remember this. And it's because I think we did internalize the Arab critique. We tried at Camp David with Bill Clinton for the last year of his presidency, and even a little bit beyond at Papa. Condoleezza Rice at Annapolis, and the year aftermath of that in 2007-8. And the effort that I should disclose I was part of with John Kerry, which I do not regret, of 2013-14. In other words, what's very important, crucially important for Arabs to understand, is that on 3 times the United States took your advice, okay, and tried to say, go for the end game. And then the implementation could be phased, but let's define the end. Let's solve the whole conflict. Hussein's lived enough time in America to know what we call in America the home run ball. Hit the ball out the park. Solve the whole thing. Do it all in one package. The problem is it didn't work. The Venn diagram of these leaders did not work. And it's not just Netanyahu and Abbas. It was Olmert and Abbas, and it was Barak and Arafat. So I just think we've tried 3 times. If I've come to the return to incrementalism, it's not because I don't prefer it your way. I do prefer it your way, but I don't think that we could be achieved. I want to avoid finger pointing, but I mean, look at what Bill Clinton said about Arafat in 2000 in trying to solve this. Olmert was willing to put a consortium of international countries for the Temple Mount Haram al-Sharif, and we had 3 months, no response, and we got a little response in the middle of the Gaza war when Olmert was almost out of power. And I can tell you, being in part of the U.S. peace team of 2013-14, we did get a response from Abbas then. So it's unfair, and I'm not saying the EU suggested it, to put the fault all on one side. But we did try 3 times to do what you said. And that's why I mentioned this other approach, not because it's the ideal. I don't think it's the ideal, but I think having failed 3 times, I don't want America to fail a 4th time.
Did you finish?
Yes.
Ms. Friedman, please.
Thank you. So thanks, Hussein, and I'm very envious that you're there. In terms of the impact of rise of religious extremism or conservatism in the U.S. and how that impacts the conflict and the possibilities for resolving it, I mean, I'd say, I think 2 things. I may change this to 3 things as I start talking, but I'd say 2 things to start with. First is that U.S. policy on Israel-Palestine has been remarkably consistent over the years. And so, to the extent of, we spend a lot of time looking, internally, those of us who live in Washington, at the role of Christian evangelicals and the changes in demography within the Jewish community. The fact is, so far, U.S. policy has been quite consistent. And while I will be a very strong critic of many things about the Trump administration, I think the jury is still out on what the Trump administration's policy on Israel-Palestine is going to be. I'm not particularly optimistic. But so far, is out. For folks who thought that this president, who won with strong support from certainly the evangelical community, even though he had really no record on Israel, Palestine, and had said things that possibly would have been of concern to them if he got on to his political talking points on Israel, Palestine. For those who thought that, well, he's president now, he's got these rabid right-wingers around him who managed to get 2 states out of the GOP platform and all of that. Well, you know, we're several months in, and if they thought that in the first few months they would utterly repudiate 2 states and move the embassy and start using the words Judea and Samaria and all of that, that hasn't happened. And the jury is very much still out. Again, I'm not optimistic. The policy has been quite consistent. By the same token, I think it would be foolish to not look at the growing influence in U.S. politics, and it's across the board of the evangelical community, Israel-Palestine. When I started working this issue in Washington almost 20 years ago, certainly I was aware of the evangelical presence on this. And this is, by the way, not all evangelicals. It's a certain sector of the evangelical community, but it's a sector that's very, very active, Christian Zionist. And by the way, I self-identify as a liberal Zionist. That Zionism has to do with what I support. But that sector was certainly present, but it wasn't all that powerful. When Christians United for Israel under Reverend Hagee held their annual conference, then it was a small affair. It is now a star-studded mega affair, holding many, many meetings and having a very clear political agenda. I think it is an important factor. I don't think it is decisive. And here's the other piece that I think is critical. As of now, U.S. policy on Israel-Palestine, and it's a policy which is in many ways, I think, problematic, head in the sand, hypocritical, unconstructive, it's largely bipartisan policy, though. I joke sometimes in my analysis. I do a weekly analysis of what's happening on Capitol Hill, and one sometimes looks at the week that has passed and says, wow, it appears the only issue on which we can get bipartisan agreement is on, you know, blasting the Palestinians for X or issuing support for Israel on Y. And that spans, you know, from the progressive side of the Democratic Party to not the progressive, pretty far on the progressive side, pretty far on the Republican side. Is that breaking down a little bit as we see more progressives willing to sound a little bit more even-handed on Israel-Palestine, or a little bit more, I would say, not even handed? And do we see more Republicans now, anytime in 20 years, who are something more like the Israeli far-right, who are pro-annexation, openly anti-state, who talk about Judea and Samaria? Certainly, that is a trend, and I think on the Republican side, the evangelical and extremist religious side of that is a piece of it. I don't think it's the whole story, but it's certainly something that's important. I'll stop there.
Thank you. Thank you.
I heard and I listened with great interest to both interventions by David and Lara. Hello to both of you. Mohammed Shtaye speaking. I want to recall the classical saying that states that usually if the left goes to war, there is an automatic support by the right. If the right wing goes to peace, there is an automatic support by the left. The problem with the Israeli right, it's not going anywhere except for the intensification of the settlements and the colonization program. The way I see it is Israel now is every day proves to be a colonial state. And we know from the typology of colonialism that at certain time in history, a daughter country fights against the mother country, i.e. the daughter country, which is a settler entity, it does fight against the mother country. We have seen it all through history, including United States fighting against England and so on. The real problem, the way I see it in Israel, is that there is a political camp represented by the Israeli left, and there is an ideological camp that is represented by the Israeli right, and the coalition of today led by Mr. Netanyahu, who himself tried to show himself as if he is in the center of the center, to the extent that some people try to paint a picture for Netanyahu as if he is Mother Teresa when it comes even to the peace process, which is totally untrue. Now, one point of clarification, David, with all the economic indicators that you referred to vis-a-vis Israel, you are right. The economic indicators are correct. But remember one important thing, that all these economic developments and economic growth is based on Palestinian misery, where Israel is taking land for free, where Israel is actually taking 600 cubic meters of our water, and where Israel is using the Palestinian market as one-way ticket. Palestinians, they import $5.2 billion of goods and commodities, and we are allowed to export to Israel a total value of $700 million of goods and commodities. I want to conclude by saying the following, and I fully agree with you, Lara, because it is exactly right that Israel becoming an apartheid state by de facto and by de jure, by de facto creating fait accomplis on the ground every day, and by de jure by all the legislations that are being passed through the Knesset. Now, my last point, and here is I put a question. Do you believe, both of you, that an American right wing in the White House and an Israeli right wing in the Knesset and in Israel, is this a recipe for conflict, or is this a recipe for cooperation vis-a-vis the Palestinian-Israeli conflict?
Thank you.
I couldn't hear clearly the last part. Maybe Laura, you want to go first?
No, can you repeat
Sure.
the question?
I think Mohammed's question is whether or not an Israeli right-wing government and a U.S. right-wing government together is a recipe for conflict or for breakthrough.
Exactly. Yes, that's the point.
Okay.
So I'll go first. I'll be brief. First of all, anyone who knows me knows I do not do the crystal ball thing. I don't believe you can really you can foresee. And like I said, for me, the Trump administration, I try to be very intellectually honest here. I'm very worried about where this government will go. I think the jury is still out, though, on where President Trump personally wants things to go in the region overall, and specifically on Israel-Palestine. And I don't know. I mean, I have friends who are very deep opponents of Trump, who believe that under Trump we can have a breakthrough because he's a different kind of leader, because the Israeli government takes him seriously, yada, 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 that there's a potential for a breakthrough. I'm dubious, but I do not completely rule out that possibility. But here's the thing. We are at a decision moment. And I said this before, this bears repeating. At 50 years, we have what is certainly, I mean, I was born after the 67 war. My whole life, my whole knowledge of Israel and the Palestinians is through the lens of occupation. So here at the 50th birthday of the occupation, we see what has been a gradual change, but now is a sea change in how Israel is dealing with the occupied territories in seeking to normalize control, either all of them or most of them, however you read it. I mean, Prime Minister Netanyahu said last week, Israel will never security control. He's going to be approving settlement units across the entire West Bank. And by the way, you have, even on the left, the so-called left, what used to be the left now is the center, basically very strongly in line with Israel can't give up or won't give up most of the settlements. At that moment in history, at 50 years, I don't know if the Trump administration is going to have the luxury that previous administrations have of sort of trying to please everybody by saying, yes, we're pro-peace, and no, we're not supporting fundamental changes. I mean, I think we're getting to a moment when there is going to have to be a sort of, we're shut up on trying to get a breakthrough and achieving one, or having a genuine new status quo on this conflict. And this goes back to what I said at the very beginning. We talk a lot in Washington. We have a lot of debates about two states, one state, what's possible. The bottom line is foreclosing the two-state solution does not create new options to resolve the conflict. I'm sure you're having other panels on this. We don't need to go into it. I will say, as someone who is a strong advocate of two states, I'm not an advocate of two states because I ideologically believe or idealistically believe the best thing, it's the fairest thing, and I think it's the only thing. It's imperfect, it's not great, it doesn't satisfy, the full desires of either party. It's the only thing that, once achieved, if achieved, satisfies enough of the core requirements of each side that they move on and stop fighting, and that the respective governments have an interest in keeping the peace. Much like the peace with Jordan, much like the peace with Egypt. So as we get to this tipping point, if the new reality is there is no peace process, the whole idea of two states is off the table for the foreseeable future, what we're really opening is status quo, which is simply open conflict, ongoing conflict, until we come back to where we are now, the past 25 years, of saying, all right, how do we negotiate an end to this conflict, which is going to end up back at the two-state solution?
Okay, let me, if I could say, Laura and I completely agree on this one, that there's no alternative to the two-state solution. So I think that's one thing that, and I think that's important. I think also, and here we didn't really talk about this because we were supposed to, focus more on the domestic angle, but I think another area, and try to get to Mohammed Shtaya's question, that is working for this is a certain regional convergence going on in the region of Arab states and Israel having common concerns about Iran, about some jihadi groups. Now, I want to be clear because I don't want to be misinterpreted. I'm asking people not to misinterpret me. There is no way to do a bypass around the Palestinian issue on this question of convergences. I hope the Arab states will be more engaged, and just as I said about parallel steps, I think they should say, look, we will take a step with you if you take a step towards the Palestinians, and the Palestinians take a step towards you. I think this should be seen as a positive, not as a negative, not as a bypass road, but as something that could reinforce progress. I think that's important. And it gets to Mohammed's question of where's Trump going and working with Israel. I will say this, and I am not someone who has been identified as been a Trump advocate, but this is somebody who he goes to his rallies. No rally there is saying, where are you on the Palestinian issue? I think he genuinely wants to move on this. He wrote a book called The Art of the Deal. He now calls this the ultimate deal. I think he sees this as a personal challenge. And it's not coming, it's politically, as Laura pointed out, this is not what the evangelicals are calling for, but this is something he personally believes in. And this should not be overlooked. I think with Netanyahu, I think and here's an angle that is not always appreciated, but I think, he wants to also show the Israeli public that if he had problems with the Obama administration, the problem was Obama and not him. He cannot afford a break with the Trump administration. Doesn't mean he will accept things that are not reasonable or unreasonable, but I think he had a lot of instances with the Trump trip that he could have made an issue out of something, not escorting to the Western Wall. There were a lot of these issues, but he didn't do it. I think he does not want to be on the wrong side of Trump. In this way, Netanyahu was very much like the Arab leaders in Saudi Arabia and elsewhere that see Trump as unpredictable and would like to ensure that the United States doesn't retrench after the war with ISIS to go back to the label America first. He wants the U.S. to remain engaged in the Middle East as the Arabs do. So this is a point of convergence between Arabs and Israel, which is to keep Trump engaged. So I have some hope here. I also have some hope that on issues, I remember when I was a student, a long time ago, I'm a bit older than Laura, I used to see 30 years ago in the bookstore, the next Middle East war, water. 30 years ago, we talked like this. But today, with technology and desalination, there is now an excess of water. Maybe not always on the Palestinian side, and this has to be addressed in a solution. And I think before a solution, we shouldn't wait for Gaza and other things. We need to address it earlier. But I don't think water is what we call in English zero sum. If one gets it, the other one doesn't. Technology has created opportunities and we should not miss these opportunities. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone? Dr. Shas, yes, please come in. I have two other. Abu Naml and General Tamsah, I believe. Dr. Shas.
Hello there.
Hi.
I believe in technology, but it was not always easy to get all your words. So excuse me if I might repeat something that you might have said. The problem with interim agreements, with step-by-step agreements, is basically the colonial settlement project. That is, we started Oslo as a step-by-step agreement. In 24 years, the number of settlers have quadrupled, and the amount of land taken by Israel and the amount of water taken by Israel has increased tremendously. And therefore, every time you wait, we lose. Any step-by-step agreement has to really include a very strict stop to all settlement activities. And that has not been possible so far. So please explain. We cannot, I mean, look, the way Israel dealt and the United States dealt with Israeli-Arab agreement has been totally different. The agreement between Israel and Egypt has been a final agreement, not a step-by-step agreement. The agreement offered to Syria, it was very close, was a final agreement. The agreement given to Jordan was a final agreement. It's only the Palestinians who are asked to go step by step. In every waiting time, we lose our land step by step. What's your comment?
Okay, thank you, Dr. Shah. Nabil, thank you for the opportunity to address you. And I will say, respectfully, I would like to say the following. I want to reiterate, if you didn't hear me clearly in the response to Hussein Ibish, my point is, my preference is to do the grand deal. And my point is, we in America tried 3 times to solve it. And people thought we were crazy, but we tried because we believe what you said. I just don't want to fail because I think we're losing the publics on all sides that don't see, they don't see with their eyes the progress. So I want to make sure that people still believe, and that means they have to see the progress. They can't hear speeches. So if we fail 3 times, you know, I worry we fail a 4th. I guess what I would say is very simple. Whenever it's all or nothing in the Middle East, between Israelis and Palestinians, with these 3 failures, it's been nothing. And I don't want it to be all or nothing is nothing. I want success. And I would just say, I agree with you. I was nodding my head about what you said, that if we're going to go back to incrementalism, there needs to be very clear terms. And that to me is that it depends how you count. 85% of the settlers, if you count East Jerusalem as settlers, is in about 5% of the land, 5%. And that's why the land swap issue is important. And if we can not get a freeze because for different reasons, at least to say outside that these blocks, there has to be a complete freeze, complete. Because I agree with you, you cannot be seen as agreeing to something incremental and having the time work against you. There needs to be clear terms. But I just don't want all or nothing to be nothing. I want this issue to move already. And like I said, 3 times we tried it this way, your way, which is preferable, would be my way too. But I don't want America to fail a 4th time.
So I'll just weigh in, and my computer is about to die. I want to warn people. I have a slightly different perspective than David. You know, the idea in Washington, there's a saying that people have in Washington that you hear on a whole range of issues, but including this one, which is, you know, when you say, well, but what about this? And they say, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And after 20-some years in Washington, I actually believe that that sentence is almost invariably followed by a suggestion, which is which is cloaked as pragmatic, but is basically offering something that is not going to work and that along the way is sacrificing a fundamental principle in favor of something that is indefensible, whether it's morally, politically, rationally indefensible. On the settlement issue, I agree with David, and I think Nabil probably agrees with us as well. At the end of the day, when there is a peace agreement, it is going to involve land swaps. I believe the Palestinian leadership has made clear that they are okay with the idea of land swaps based on the idea that they are negotiated, agreed on, limited, and based on 67. Now we are told, well, if you say that based on that, Israel should stop changing the facts on the ground and get to negotiating, and we should stop building settlements in the meantime, you are told that is making the perfect the enemy of the good. And the good is put out there as being let Israel go ahead and really de facto annex 5 to 8% of the West Bank, which are the areas that David's talking about, the areas where the blocks are, which are undefined, the areas inside the barrier. Don't take into account that solution, which is put out there as good, which is in this case supposed to be better than perfect, is a solution that effectively on the ground takes contiguous off the table for a Palestinian state. It takes a capital in East Jerusalem off the table. Every time people talk about, well, building only within the barrier, that includes the entire envelope around East Jerusalem. It takes a Palestinian capital, viable and contiguous, in East Jerusalem, off the table. And it takes off the table the entire notion that this solution will be negotiated. I sat here at arguing with people about the Security Council resolution we had in December, and they said, how dare the Palestinians support this? How dare the world support this non-negotiated step, even though it didn't decide anything on permanent status? But somehow we are supposed to accept that Israel unilaterally, with the backing of the U.S., should continue building, and in this case, no doubt, massively expand building in 5 to 8% of the West Bank, unilaterally, outside negotiation. How that is consistent with getting to a negotiated solution escapes me. And that don't make the perfect the enemy of the good here is incredibly dangerous. And it marginalizes what are the real pragmatic answers for how you resolve this conflict, which honestly starts with Israel and the Palestinians both demonstrating a seriousness about getting to a negotiated solution. There are things the Palestinians can do to demonstrate that they can do more of or do better. On the Israeli side, the number one thing Israel could do to show that it is prepared to get to a solution, which is a solution about dividing the land, let's be clear, the number one thing it could do is rein in settlement activity, period. And Israel refuses to do that. And as a compromise position, agreeing to rein it in some of the areas, and by the way, those become the areas that are negotiated. So we're going to keep everything that we unilaterally keep building on now, and then we'll negotiate to keep more in a negotiation. That does not get us to a negotiated solution. What that does is cement the status quo and make things worse and make it less likely we're ever going to get to it.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Abu Nabil.
احنا العرب بنحط عنوان وبنحكي بموضوع آخر. عنوان الجلسة هو التحولات في المجتمع الإسرائيلي. أنا ما لاحظت أنه تم أي بحث بالتحولات في المجتمع الإسرائيلي.
أنا شرحت لك إياها.
نعم.
المقدمة تبعيتي كان في شرح.
يا سيدي على الأقل أنا أمامي برنامج حتى ما نضيع وقت. اقتصر الحديث على التوصيف السياسي. التوصيف السياسي اللي تقدم أعتقد أنه معروف. السؤال ما هي خلفية الاستعصاء السياسي اللي حصل؟ هون أنا حاب أقول أنه في تعسف استخدام المصطلحات. وإحنا إذا تمينا نهرب من الحقيقة ما حنوصل لنتيجة. أنا السؤال اللي حطرحه قد يكون محرج، من هي إسرائيل التي نتحدث عنها؟ أنا لا أطرح هذا السؤال من موقع أنه هي إسرائيل 48 ولا اسمعها 67، لا. أنا بطرح من هي إسرائيل السياسية؟ هل هناك إسرائيل خارج المشروع التوراتي؟ وهل هناك إسرائيل إلا إسرائيل التوراتية؟ وهل إسرائيل التوراتية تستطيع أن تقدم على تسوية أيا كانت تمس بأرض إسرائيل بحكم لغتها أو بحسب لغتها. أعتقد أن هذا هي المرجعية الأساسية للبحث بالموضوع الاستعصائي اللي احنا فيه. الأمر الآخر، هناك كتير يعني احتقار للعقل البشري، وما مقصود أنتم، مقصود الخطاب اللي بيتحدث عن تحول إسرائيل حول اليمين. أي حدا بيعرف أن المشروع الإسرائيلي من لحظته الأولى مشروع يميني، إلا إذا كنا مفكرينه كان يساري. اللي قاد المشروع الإسرائيلي ل 48 وعمل دولي هم حركة العمل. اللي عمل حرب 48 حركة العمل، اللي عمل حرب 67 حركة العمل، اللي عطل التسوية حركة العمل. وبالتالي علينا أن نبحث عن سبب آخر. آخر شيء، ما هو التعريف الصحيح لإسرائيل؟ هل الصحيح التعبير اللي عم يفرض علينا أن إسرائيل دولة فصل عنصري ومفكرينها أقصى الشتائم؟ مع الأسف الشديد إسرائيل ليست دولة فصل عنصري، إسرائيل دولة استئصال عنصري، لأنه بجنوب إفريقيا ميزوا بين السود والبيض بس بقوهم بمحلهم. المشروع الإسرائيلي كما نعرف جميعا يقوم على استئصال العرب من فلسطين. بهذا المعنى علينا أن نذهب بالمسائل إلى بداياتها الطبيعية إذا أردنا أن نصل إلى نهاياتها ونحصل على الأجوبة صحيحة. وشكرا مرة ثانية.
شكرا.
So I'm gonna go first on this one because literally my computer is going to die at any moment.
Ms. Friedman,
Sorry?
please carry on.
Okay, so very quickly, I found to disagree with the framing of that question. I don't believe that Israel was existed to wipe out any Arabs. We can debate 48 and things that happened in 48. I think Israel still, frankly, for me, ending the occupation is the beginning of Israel starting to come to terms with its creation in 48, how it needs to treat its Arab citizens, and starting to build relations in the region, and resolving some other outstanding issues. For instance, the issue of Jews who came to Israel from Arab lands. You have a whole range of outstanding issues that go with 1948 that relate to both Arabs and Jews. Resolving this conflict along the 67 lines is the starting point to being able to resolve those. And questions about, using the word apartheid. I know a lot of people use it for years. I think it's going to happen more and more as people act more and more like it's a permanent occupation. I think it's going to face that more and more. The similarities between Israel and South Africa are very limited. It's a very different context. Certainly, the policies when you go to someplace like Hebron, I think for folks who are familiar with the South Africa experience, see some similarities. But the root cause is not the same unless you view Israelis as not having a legitimate claim to having a state in the region, and I disagree with that. And for folks who say, well, let the Israelis, they're all Europeans, let them go back to Europe, they have an exact parallel on the far right of the Jewish community and the evangelical community that says, well, there are no Palestinians. They're just Arab. Let them go to some other Arab state. You have two peoples here. Each of these peoples has a clear identity. Whether you believe that identity existed before 67 or before 48, frankly, to me, is irrelevant. They are both peoples. They have a desire and an identity and a desire for self-determination that is legitimate, and which, whether you think it's legitimate or not, is not going anywhere at all. So for me, I'm someone who believes I'm pragmatic. I'm not idealistic or ideological on this. Pragmatically, the goal here is to find a solution that lets both peoples achieve what they need so that their future generations can have normal lives and better lives. And that really is about a pragmatic solution, not about calling each other names or looking at the creation myths that delegitimize either side. Thank you.
I completely agree with Laura on this. We have to focus on solutions that protect the identities of both sides. look, Israel has had a peace treaty 38 years ago with Egypt. It was not actually reached by the Labor Party, it was reached by the Likud. And that peace has been kept scrupulously since 1979. People say, oh, they want to expand, they won't keep their word. And the fact is that this peace treaty is held. The Jordan-Israel peace treaty of 1994 is held. These people have made peace agreements and they've kept to them. And I don't think we should make life easy for us by pretending the other side is irrelevant or the like. We need to do what I hope I said in my remarks. I really want to say this in the most respectful, constructive way possible. I really hope in the Arab world there's some thinking that says, okay, maybe Hamas, Hezbollah, this rejectionism has helped move Israel to the right, because when Israel gets out of land, there's rockets from these places where they withdraw from. Let's think how we can reach out and go with the Arab Peace Initiative, make it parallel steps. Again, don't say Arabs should do everything first and only Israel later. I am not saying that. I'm saying parallel step that we can build, you guys can have a big impact, more than you realize, on the debate in Israel. Don't make it sound that that's not the case. I really think this is possible. And, I just want to comment one thing on what Laura said about some of the illiberal trends. And I also have some concerns. I don't want to say I do not. I do. But I also want to show also the other side. The judge who sent the president of Israel to jail, Moshe Katsav, was an Arab judge. He was the one who sent an Israeli president to jail. And by the way, the courts is now has an Israeli prime minister sitting in jail, Ehud Olmert, not set by an Arab, but this prime minister is under investigation. The Israeli democratic processes are vibrant. And I believe you have Israeli Arabs in the Knesset. They yell at the prime minister every day in the Knesset, every day. I'm not here to say it's a perfect situation, but considering the environment they live in, I think they have accorded themselves well. And I have confidence in the Israeli civil society to deal with some of these illiberal trends. But my point is, this is an Israel that has had 2 peace treaties and has kept them. And so I'm asking you, I am almost begging you to think anew how to reach out, because if Israel's moved to the right, you influence it. You really can by reaching out to parts of Israel, because the right uses Hezbollah and they use Hamas to strengthen themselves. There's an interrelationship, and I'm not arguing the opposite could also be true. Hezbollah and Hamas maybe use the right, but we need to see the intersection between the domestic politics and policies of rejectionist groups.
Thank you. General Timsah?
My computer is shutting down, so I'm leaving you now. Thank you very much.
You still have time for a question, for 2 questions?
I'll stay as long as you need me.
The camera.
Hello, my name is General Timsah. I'm a retired Army General from the Lebanese Army. I have 2 questions, a couple of questions for you. The first one, we were talking about the solution of 2 states. Nobody noticed that the Trump administration, they don't support this option. And the second thing is Mr. Netanyahu, he just fall on this, and he thinks now that the Arabs, especially the Gulf states, they need his help to confront Iran. And this is because he is not giving any attention to the solution of the 2 states. For the American administration, it's a sharp detour from the past policy of the American administration to support the solution of 2 states. And something else, that if Mr. Netanyahu thinks that by supporting the Arabs against Iran, does he think that one day the Iranian regime would change, or they will change their expansion policy, and that he's betting on will fall? And the last thing, you always ask the Arabs as Mr. Mاكوفسكي said, or the rulers or the kings, that to give more. Well, they cannot give anything more if something is giving to the Palestinians. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree. Laura, you're still there. Do you want to respond to any of this? Or?
No, it's okay.
Oh, she's not?
That's it.
Oh, she's not?
That's it.
Okay.
Following you, I'm following you.
Okay. I would say the following, which is, I thank the general for his questions about, if I understood them correctly, one is, where's the administration on two states or not two states? The president had a kind of inartful expression at that first press conference, but I think it is clear that the two-state approach is the only approach. I think that is something the administration's advisors, I think they are of that school of thought as well. So I think this is clearly the direction, it seems to me. The second part is, if I understood the question about Netanyahu viewing the Gulf Arabs to confront Iran, and what does he want to achieve with this, if I understood, and does he looking for Iranian regime change? I think my personal view, and here may be where Beirut comes into the picture, a lesson for Israel, of Israel and of Israelis I've talked to after 1982 is 82 was a change that Israel cannot social engineer another state in the region. They are not Arabs, they are not Persians, they do not live in these countries, they don't know these countries well enough. And that's why also the Syrian civil war, they have stayed out of it because they know their limitations of what they can achieve and what they cannot achieve. So I don't think they're for regime change. Their concern is that Iran is a country who says they want to wipe out Israel off the face of the map. And no country wants to hear another country say they want to wipe them off the face of the map. So what do you do about that? But that doesn't mean you can bypass. I keep repeating this. I don't believe any Israeli that I have talked to believes you can bypass the Palestinian issue and deal just with the Arab states on Iran. I think they think if there's, it's one thing to have under the table cooperation on security, but when it comes to anything that is overt, anything public, there's no getting around the Palestinian issue. So I don't think one comes at the expense of the other. To the contrary, we need to find a way to get the Arab states more engaged in this issue. The view in Washington and in Jerusalem, I think, is that the Arab states have 100 other issues right now, and this issue is not at the top of their list. I would like to see this issue be higher up on their list, but there's no bypassing this issue. I don't believe people, serious people in Israel, even in the Likud, believe that is possible, that you can have an embassy in Riyadh or something and not address the Palestinians. It's impossible.
Thank you. Mr. Ahmed Abdurrahman. Hassan. Hassan Abdurrahman. Mr. Hassan Abdurrahman, he used to be the PLO representative.
Hello. Hello, what's up?
How are you? Can you hear me? How are you, David? This is Hassan.
Good to see you.
Listen, I listened to you very carefully and to Lara, and I thank you both for being here. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Yes.
It's a little garbled, but I from Beirut for some reason, but I can still hear.
Well, I know that we are at the end of our session, that's why I'm not going to take too much time. But you remember that in the aftermath of the Oslo Accords signing in 1993, many Arab countries opened representative offices in Israel and vice versa. Morocco, Mauritania, even Qatar, Tunisia. And this did not in any way change the behavior of Israel in relation to the issue of the settlements. Israel continued to build settlements and actually intensified the building settlements in the occupied Palestinian territories. Second, you are talking about 3 attempts by the United States trying to reach a comprehensive settlement. Why do you think those 3 attempts failed? Is it because it is undoable, or was there something wrong with the process, or because the conclusion, the end game that the Palestinians wanted, Israelis were unwilling to give? Why it failed in those 3 attempts, and it would succeed now without defining the outcome, if I heard you correctly? And the second, my other question is, in light of what Lara have been saying about the situation in the West Bank, and of course, we all know the situation on the ground, 650,000 settlers, 27,000 housing units are under approval now. There's no indication that Israeli government is changing its behavior. Do you think really and honestly that the 2-state solution is still feasible? Both of you. Thank you.
Thank you. Hassan, thank you very much for your excellent questions. Just in terms of the Arab state involvement in the 90s, I think Ehud Barak would have won the 99 election without that. I think involvement in the 90s, I think Ehud Barak would have won the 99 election without he, was basically with him to try to go to Camp David and those, that effort by Clinton. And I wanted to avoid finger pointing out of respect, because I really feel we have to focus on the future. But if you ask me, I'll answer you, which is that I felt that what Bill Clinton said was true about, Rais Arafat not having counter proposals. I think Barak was willing to divide up, the old city of Jerusalem. Arabs don't remember that. I think Olmert, was willing to have a 5-country consortium over Rama Sharif, Temple Mount, whatever you want to call it. These were extremely far-reaching proposals. And an effort I was a part of carried. I'm not in liberty to go into all the details. I feel there was some hope, believe it or not, on land and on the refugee issue. This is my personal view, that there could have been breakthrough on these 2 questions. But I think on some of the other issues, the 3 other questions, I don't think we were close. On Jerusalem, on the security arrangements, and on the issue of accept the character of the other side state. Israel had no problem to say a state of Palestine for Palestinians, but the Palestinians didn't want to say a state of Israel, a nation state of the Jewish people, of course, with all rights for all systems. Until I can see that these 3 issues, that the gaps can be eliminated on these 3 issues, I feel it's diplomatic malpractice for an American to say, let's try again, let's try it again. I'm not convinced, and I'm really worried all or nothing is nothing. And Laura and I don't disagree on some things. I don't think this can continue indefinitely like this. It's impossible. And therefore, I want to see some progress, that the people on the ground, the Palestinian public and the Israeli public, see something move, something, because I feel when it's all or nothing, nothing. And so I want to see some progress. And that's why, for me, I do see time as urgent in this regard. We might differ on how to get there, but it's not because that's not my first choice, as I said to Hussein Ibish. But if we fail 3 times, I'm supposed to believe with these leaders we won't fail a 4th time. So I want something that's real, something genuine, that people with their eyes can see that there's a change.
Thank you. Anyone? Still anyone? Anyone? Is there anyone who wants to finish? do you think that Israel now, with these deep changes in the Israeli society, is ready for the solution? What can be really done to change the situation inside Israel?
Okay, this is, in my view, I'm glad you asked that, because to me it actually links up to something I just said before, which is, you know, you can help re-change the map in Israel. If you say, okay, we can't solve it all now, and you're going to stop all settlement activity, let's say, outside the blocks, outside the barrier, we're also going to take one step, too. We are not going to give money to families of people who stab teenagers or whatever, that they do not get a special salary, but something that shows you take the incitement issue seriously. Or we're going to have religious figures stand up against violence in the name of religion. I think this will show the other side you're a partner. But the Israeli fear is that the Palestinians don't take the incitement issue seriously, and the Palestinian fear is that the Israelis don't take the land issue seriously. Each side has to do one thing that shows they do take it seriously. And I think what it'll force the Netanyahu to do is to reconfigure the map. He's got to bring the Labor Party in, or Lapid. I don't think will join, but Labor would maybe, and maybe move out Mr. Bennett, his party. But right now, Netanyahu's saying, why should I destroy my government if I don't have something in my hand of an alternative? So force an alternative. It's in your power. You can do it. I'm not saying you personally. I'm saying the Palestinian side. We have Mr. Steyer here, and Nabil Shaf is here. You can help shift the Israeli map by saying, okay, let's move. Let's do something. It's going to force Netanyahu's coalition to change, too, because I don't know if this coalition could take, a big move or some move. You could force a coalition shift, but as long as it's all or nothing, it's perfect for Mr. Bennett, because he knows it's not going to be everything, and he stands where he is. So I just want to show this is an interactive process, and you could impact the political map in Israel, and also the coalition configuration. If the Palestinians and the United States said, okay, we're going to try this, in my view, Netanyahu has to change his government. The government can't be configured the way it is now. This is partly in your hands, too. That's what I want to get across.
Okay, thank you so much.
And I want to thank you, if I can, sir, just to thank the audience for listening. And it's a great privilege to address you. I hope, inshallah, I can do it next time in person, but I want to thank you for the honor of letting me talk to you today.
Okay, bye for now. Shukran.